I think one of the ways is to actually fund people that are actually designed to investigate anti-Semitism on college campuses.
What's there to investigate? We see it.
We
saw it. Did you watch television? Did you see what happened at Columbia?
Yeah, I mean, why would we permit a foreign student who's here on a student visa who commits an act of violence, an unlawful act against a Jewish student? Why wouldn't we say, sorry, but if you're going to commit acts of violence against Jewish students, Jewish Americans or foreign Jewish students, whomever, we're going to revoke your visa. I mean, you're going home.
So I think on that issue itself, I'm trying to think now.
Rabbi Eli Bueller emailed every Jewish student on campus and said, quote, "The events of the last few days have made it clear that Columbia University's public safety cannot guarantee Jewish students' safety in the face of extreme anti-Semitism and anarchy. I would strongly recommend you return home." This is the rabbi at the university saying your school will not protect your safety. And Columbia didn't do a damn thing about it. Now,
I think a mom I talked to who had a child at one of these elite universities said it best. They had spent money getting through high school, getting the best grades, being academically competitive, and feeling that they had opened her mind to want to experience the world and learn and appreciate others with diverse opinions and views and cultures. And they sent her to school, and every time she came home, they noticed it seemed to be her worldview was narrowing.
This committee held a generalized hearing on hate crime. I'm going to introduce 3 witnesses, and Senator Durbin's going to introduce 2. Our first witness is Ms. Adela Kohab. She's a legal fellow at the National Jewish Advocacy Center, New York City, an advocate for Jewish college students. She gained national attention while a student at NYU when she filed a civil rights complaint against the university in 2019 for discrimination against Jewish students. She's also a UN speaker on Jewish rights and has written extensively on issues related to anti-Semitism in Israel. You're welcome. Next, we have Eliza Lewin, president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. This nonprofit was created to advance civil and human rights for Jewish people and promote justice for all. Then we'll hear from Uzra Noami, an American journalist, author, activist, who has worked on issues related to Islam's women's rights and free speech. She's a former Wall Street Journal reporter. She has written extensively on these issues. Her advocacy is motivated by her dear friend and colleague, Daniel Pearl, who we all know was savagely murdered by terrorists in Pakistan. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to first welcome Kevin Racklin. He's the inaugural Washington director at the Nexus Project. 15 years experience in advocacy, coalition building, and nonprofit leadership. Senior fellow for Israel and Palestine policy at the Alliance for Peace Building. Kevin previously served as Vice President of Public Affairs at J Street and as the U.S. Director for the Alliance for Middle East Peace. I also welcome Mirav Solomon. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Good. Junior at Tufts University, studying international relations, concentrating on the Middle East. She's an alumnus of the School for Ethics and Global Leadership. I'm going to mess this name up, I'm afraid. The Kavunan Gap Year Program and Seeds of Peace.
Thank you.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you all for being here. Ms. Solomon, I want to be sure I understand your testimony. Did I understand you to testify that anti-Semitism is worse under the Trump administration?
Senator, thank you for your question.
You don't have to thank me. Okay. Your best thanks is to answer.
Okay, well, I'll tell you that anti-Semitism has been rising, especially since the 2017
but has the Trump
Charlottesville
administration
attack.
caused that? Is that your testimony?
I wouldn't say the Trump administration has caused anti-Semitism. Has there been an increase since Trump has entered office? Yes.
Do you see a causal connection there?
Yes.
Why?
Trump has highlighted and platformed neo-Nazis and white supremacists.
Okay. Mr. I can't see that far.
Racklin.
Mr. Racklin, I understood you to say that in answer to Senator Durbin's question, the spending reductions, reducing the federal budget would increase anti-Semitism. Isn't that what you said?
No, I did not. I said that the constant threats to cut money to the Office for Civil Rights and the Department of Education prevents the federal government from adequately investigating anti-Semitism and other hate crimes on college campuses.
So you think one way to stop anti-Semitism is to give people more money? Is that right?
I think one of the ways is to actually fund people that are actually designed to investigate anti-Semitism on college campuses.
What's there to investigate? We see it.
We
saw it. Did you watch television? Did you see what happened at Columbia?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it was clear to me that the administration at Columbia and most members of the faculty believed passionately in diversity, equity, inclusion, and the right to hurt Jews. That's what I saw. Isn't that what you saw?
I saw.
Isn't that what you saw?
I saw protesters against the war in Gaza and them using some anti-Semitic slogans and thoughts. I would say, however, that it's hard. I would say,
isn't that
however,
what you're telling me? That's not what you saw. Now, don't get off the subject on me now. You're telling me that's not what you saw.
I'm telling you that it is difficult for the federal government to adequately address the issue of anti-Semitism.
Are you telling me the Columbia administration and the faculty was supportive of the Jewish community?
I think that they are trying to
You need to stop dipping into your ketamine stash.
Into what? Excuse me?
Now, if we're going to solve this problem, we need to talk about it. And it wasn't just at Columbia. It was at Berkeley. It was at UCLA. It was at Barnard. And Columbia has a history of discriminating against Jewish people. They used to refuse to let Jewish students come to their university. Now, you can try to bubble wrap this, but that's what I saw. If you want to stop a lot of the anti-Semitism, maybe we need to stop teaching kids to be anti-Semitic.
Sir, I would relish that opportunity.
Let me ask you a question, Ms. Kohab. Did I say that right?
Kohab.
Do you think it's possible to feel compassion for the Palestinian people without hating Jews?
Absolutely.
Would you elaborate on that? Because it looks to me like many of our Ivy League universities, they weren't the only ones. Some universities handled it well. Vanderbilt, University of Chicago, Tulane. But it looks like the administration was teaching kids you got to pick a side. Mm-hmm. You either have to hate Jews or you have to be for Hamas. You can't be. There's no middle ground. Tell me what you saw. You've written a book about it. Maybe Mr. Rocklin ought to read it.
Just because we are testifying, I wrote a chapter in the anthology Young Zionist Voices about what's happening on college campuses, and my book is coming soon, so look out for that.
Good plug, but
so let me answer your question.
Can you feel compassion for the Palestinian people and not hate Jews?
Absolutely. I think that what I've seen on college campuses is a pushing of a Marxist framing of the way that you see the world. And this is not only in liberal studies departments. I've taken dance classes, I've taken creative writing classes, where your final project is literally called The Political is Personal. And what they're teaching you on college campuses is that the political is personal and that everything should be personalized. And there's a global north, a global south, a global right, and a global wrong. And the issue with college campuses and what's happening right now in the United States is that we're allowing ideology to drive violence. A society that says that you can commit violent acts based on your ideology because your ideology is correct is a society that's eroding. And that's what I see on college campuses. Now, you asked if I could feel Palestinian peoplehood, right? If I could feel compassion for the Palestinian people. Absolutely. And every night when I go to bed, yes, I pray for the Jewish people, but I also pray for the Palestinian people, for God to send them leaders that actually care more about their safety. Leaders that put their people's safety in order to propel an ideology at risk aren't leaders. If you look at Hamas, they tout what happened after October 7th up until this day as a victory. How can you lie in rubble after thousands of your people have died and call that a victory? So what I see that has to happen on college campuses is de-radicalization. Until you admit that there's a radical ideology happening on a college campus, you cannot fight it. You cannot fight it.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. Let me say that I too am pleased that we're finally holding a hearing after years on this vitally important topic, particularly as these anti-Jewish, anti-Israel protests now erupt again on our college campuses, most of which, all of which, are getting massive amounts of federal funding. Mr. Rockland, is that how I say your name, by the way? Is it Rockland?
Rackland, just
Rackland.
R-A-C-K rather than
Rackland. Okay, I got it. All right. I'll see if I can adhere to that.
Appreciate it.
Let me just ask you, I just want to make sure that I heard you in response. I think it was to Senator Welch. Did you say that you're not in favor of canceling visas for foreign students who commit unlawful acts against Jewish students?
I said at this time, Nexus does not have a position on that, the organization I work for. And then I went on to describe how in the national strategy, it doesn't talk about that, doesn't recommend that. And that was done in consultation with 1,000 leaders across the board and was supported by the ADL, AJC, JFNA, J Street, all of us.
So you don't think that's not a good idea? I mean, why would we permit a foreign student who's here on a student visa who commits an act of violence, an unlawful act against a Jewish student? Why wouldn't we say, sorry, but if you're going to commit acts of violence against Jewish students, Jewish Americans or foreign Jewish students, whomever, we're going to revoke your visa. I mean, you're going home.
So I think on that issue itself, I'm trying to think now. It's not, when you're talking about acts of violence and you're talking about actually breaking U.S. law towards students, that is criminal. That should be done through the Justice Department. When we're talking about deportation, that's immigration. So if there is a criminal investigation that leads to deportation, I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Well, I'm talking about student visas. They're here on visas. They're here on particular.
Doing that.
Well, sure, but why don't we write into the process a condition of the visa that if you assault a Jewish student on campus, you're out of here. You're gone.
If it was written in the statute and if it was broad enough to be not just be for Jews, but for all people that have experienced discrimination, regardless of who they are, I think that we should look at that. But I think until that is in law, what I'm basing this on is what the current statute says and what currently is being done.
Well, listen, I guess I don't understand the hesitation here at all. To me, this is an easy call, and I've urged the current Secretary of State, Secretary Rubio, to do this. I think he's got the authority to do it. My position is it would send an incredibly clear message. If you come to this country on a student visa, you are here as a guest of the United States for particular purposes. If you assault a Jewish student on campus, you ought to be out of here. And we ought to make it clear to people we are not going to tolerate it. We're not going to tolerate it for any reason. Can I just ask you why I have you here, Mr. Rackland?
Yeah,
I've heard you talk about DEI. I just want to be clear on this. You would agree, wouldn't you, that much of this DEI rhetoric has been weaponized against Jewish students? The DEI dialogue has been weaponized against them. They're called colonizers. They're called imperialists. They're called oppressors. It's the classic intersectionality DEI language. I'll give you some tangible examples. The DEI chair at MIT publicly issued statements calling Israel a genocidal apartheid state. You have the University of Washington's DEI office that sent out an email describing Israel as, once again, an unlawful and oppressive settler colonial apartheid state. The DEI program coordinator at Rutgers said to Jewish students, F you colonizer, F you Zionists. I mean, my point is, isn't it time to speak some truth to power here to these people and to say that Israel is not a colonizer state. It is not an apartheid state. Jewish students are not colonizers, and this kind of rhetoric shouldn't be weaponized against them. You'd agree with that, surely.
I would say that it's wrong to blame Jewish students for the actions of the state of Israel in any way, shape, or form.
And it's wrong to call the state of Israel a colonial apartheid state.
I would say that Israel right now, a number of different human rights organizations talk about them in that sense. Personally, I don't see them I don't see Israel that way. I've been there many times. I have family that live there. I've been to the West Bank. I've enjoyed it. However, there are considerable issues regarding the occupation that need to be addressed, and inadequacies between how Palestinians live in the West Bank versus how Palestinian Israelis live in.
My time, I'm only interrupting you because my time has almost expired, and the chairwoman is being extremely strict on the time. So, but I just want to make this point because I think we're seeing it's over and over and over where you have actual campus apparatus, DEI apparatus on these campuses. These are departments, these are officials, these are professors who are weaponizing that against Jewish students. My question is, shouldn't we condemn that? No holds barred. Say that is wrong for DEI officials to be saying Israeli students are colonizers, Jewish American students are colonizers, Israel's an apartheid state. That is wrong, full stop, no conditions. Would you agree with that?
I would say that a lot of DEI programs need to actually bring into its anti-Semitism training, either going to other organizations, because so much of what is happening within the DEI
or just be eliminated. Why don't we just eliminate the DEI programs and eliminate the kind of reverse discrimination against Jews that they are promoting?
I appreciate your passion, and we understand. Thank you very much for your participation. I'll also, I caught myself a moment ago getting excited as well, but I'll remind the audience, as Chairman Grassley said, we need to conduct this hearing with decorum so that we can remain efficient. So I'd ask for your help and participation in that. And with that, I'll send it over to Senator Cruz.
Anti-Semitism is evil, it is wrong, and it is flourishing with the acquiescence and in many cases active participation of students, of faculty, of administrators and government officials, and sadly, the Democrat Party has a deep and pervasive problem confronting this evil. For the last 2 years, in the wake of October 7th, this committee held 0 hearings on anti-Semitism in the United States, despite the fact that Republicans repeatedly called for it. The acts of violence prior to October 7th, 3,669 anti-Semitic incidents occurred in the United States. Following October 7th, in less than 3 months, that number spiked to over 5,000. In 2024, that number skyrocketed to 10,005 anti-Semitic incidents. This problem is particularly acute on our college campuses. Columbia University was a major epicenter where they encouraged, tolerated, and celebrated this vicious and vile anti-Semitism. I got it. We're good. Rabbi Eli Buehler emailed every Jewish student on campus and said, quote, "The events of the last few days have made it clear that Columbia University's public safety cannot guarantee Jewish students' safety in the face of extreme anti-Semitism and anarchy. I would strongly recommend you return home." This is the rabbi at the university saying your school will not protect your safety. And Columbia didn't do a damn thing about it. And I'll tell you what, the rabbi wasn't crazy. Here is one picture taken on the campus of Columbia. In the back are Jewish students waving American flags and Israeli flags. In the front is a Columbia student wearing a mask because these cowards are oh so brave they cover their faces, holding a handwritten sign that says Al-Qassam's next targets. Al-Qassam is the military branch of Hamas. Understand what this student is saying. She is calling for the murder of her Jewish classmates. And by the way, this student, the internet being what it is, she's been identified now on the internet. This is not a Palestinian who's subject to oppression. This is a rich blonde girl from Atlanta whose parents are multimillionaire real estate developers, and they got so proud, I'm sending my child to an Ivy League education where she'll be indoctrinated to dress up and advocate Hamas murdering Jewish students because they are Jews. Now, if you agree that is evil and vile, let me ask you something. Where are the Democrats? Not a one is here. And it's because the Democrat Party has decided the pro-Hamas wing of the party is more important than protecting Jewish students in America. And if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe Chuck Schumer. No, that's the wrong one. No, it's not. Chuck Schumer, texting with Colombia, said the following. On January 4th, then President of Colombia, Shafik, explained to Shipman and her fellow co-chair David Greenwald that she had met with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who advised Shafik that universities' political problems about anti-Semitism are really only among Republicans. We, the Democrats, we don't care about this anti-Semitism stuff. Ms. Lewin, am I the only person that has noticed that these anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic protests, that the tents all match?
No, you are not the only one to have noticed.
Is it clear that there is significant money funding these attacks on Jewish students and attacks on America?
It is clear that there is coordination and there must be some common funding.
In the last 2 years, under the Biden Justice Department, are you aware of any investigation to follow the money behind these protests?
I am not.
Are you aware of anyone who has been indicted for funding these protests?
I am not.
Are you aware of any university that has had their Title VI federal funds cut off because they've tolerated, welcomed, celebrated, and as Senator Hawley put out, had their own officials cheering on anti-Semitism as even one university lost their funding?
I am not aware of any university having actually lost their funding.
And I'll point out also, some of the defenders say free speech, free speech. You're right. You have a free speech right as an American citizen to say vile, hateful, bigoted things. Let me ask you something. If a university student went into the public square dressed up in a Klan outfit, burned a cross, and said we should murder African-American students, do you have any doubt the university would expel that student?
I am fairly certain that the universities would take action and ensure that their policies
They should
were followed.
expel them if they're foreign students. They should be deported. And mark my words, if you are horrified at the anti-Semitism, you will see the Trump Department of Justice follow the money, prosecute the people who are paying for this, prosecute those engaged in violence, and cut off the money from universities that are tolerating and celebrating this. That is the rule of law. And ask yourself, why did the Biden Justice Department do absolutely nothing about this horror that is unfolding?
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
As a Muslim woman, I'm sure hate crimes against all religious minorities trouble you, and you've said that very clearly just now. But in our current environment, do you think that anti-Semitism warrants attention in its own right?
Sir, it absolutely does warrant attention in its own right. Anti-Semitism is now an industry. It is an industry that is being perpetuated, unfortunately, by organizations that even have nonprofit status in America, 501c3s, 501c4s. And these are organizations that are belying their own mission in order to use as a Trojan horse this opposition to Israel to perpetuate this hate. These young students that we have are the targets of that hate. It is, October 7th became their moment. And what has happened is that, unfortunately, pulling our punches and not recognizing their danger in our society serves no one, and it absolutely does not serve our interests of an inclusive society. An actual inclusive society means that we do not allow hate of any kind, and the kind that we have right now against our Jewish community is of epidemic proportions.
Ms. Kohab, this first question, if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. I got two questions for you. What are your views on Trump's administration approach to anti-Semitism? And what is the most thoughtful and effective way that you think the task force can address the issue?
Thank you for the question. First, I want to say this is about anti-Semitism, but I do believe that President Trump has been the greatest ally that Israel has had in the White House and that the Jewish people have had. When I was a student and I filed my complaint against NYU after feeling I was consistently ignored, Trump's administration invited me to speak with him, and he signed an executive order on combating anti-Semitism, and that speaks volume. And it really, really pains me to see that after what we saw on October 7th, when every single campus erupted in anti-Semitism, the students that were on campus across all universities didn't have the same treatment. They did not feel heard by the administration. They didn't see an executive order making sure that their rights are protected and heard. And actually, during last administration after October 7th, not a single university has lost its federal funding under Title VI, despite how many Title VI cases have been filed against them. So I have to say that I very much welcome Trump's actions in combating anti-Semitism. Now, your second question, can you remind me?
What is your most thoughtful and effective way that you think the task force can address the issue?
Absolutely. I think that that first thing that the task force has to do is adopt a definition. And the IRA definition has been adopted by the overwhelming majority of Jewish organizations. Actually, of the conference of presidents of the major Jewish organizations, 51 of 53 have adopted the IRA definition. 38 states have adopted the IRA definition. The United States government has adopted IRA for Title VI, and also they've adopted it in the State Department in 2015. In order to have a definition, you must have objectivity, and this is a definition that, number one, understands anti-Semitism the best. Its examples show how anti-Semitism shifts and shakes and changes with the times depending on what people want to scapegoat. And there is also the requirement of objectivity. In order to have a good working definition, it must be objectively be able to be recognized in order to be used. And IRA is that objective definition. I think that until we pass a bipartisan act that defines anti-Semitism, we cannot fight it, because it's impossible to fight something that you can't define.
And then also for you, bin Laden's letter to America, this surfaced in November 2023, surged in popularity on social media. As an influencer, what role do you think social media plays in spreading anti-Semitism, and how are the platforms responsible for it?
So that's a phenomenal question. And first, I want to say that social media doesn't generate ideas, it just spreads them. And this is actually what I was taught at NYU. In one of my Middle Eastern Studies classes, we read an essay called The Jihadist Next Door, among many other essays that glorified religious extremism and jihadism, putting it in the social and cultural context of the time. And when I raised my hand in class to ask whether Osama bin Laden was a terrorist, I was met with scoffs and laughs, and my professor said, I'm sure some would call him that. So I saw this at NYU in 2016 and 17. This was nothing new. So in 2023, when this starts going viral on social media, all I saw was exactly what my peers were already parroting. Now, as someone who does have a substantial following on social media, I mainly use Instagram. I also use YouTube. I no longer use TikTok. The algorithms across all platforms have been ripe for anti-Semitism, not only because of the sheer numbers, because of the way that clickbait works. A video that I would post on Instagram would go viral on TikTok in a completely opposite direction, to the point that I was getting death threats, calls for me to commit suicide on the daily, and I'm no longer on TikTok. Now, when it comes to anti-Semitism across all social media platforms, they've done way too little. Their bias reporting is completely non-transparent. I've had posts taken down where I was just reporting on anti-Semitism, while other people who are holding up Nazi symbols or who are openly calling for the genocide of all Jews had their posts continue to stay up. And I think that until we look at the way that social media is perpetuating these dangerous ideas, which do exist and have existed, we're going to have a very big problem. And I do have two younger sisters, both of them Gen Z, very different politically. And if you look at what each has on their algorithm, they're looking to divide and distract.
Thanks to each of you for being here. This is an important topic and one that we've got to wrestle with. You know, over the last year and a half, far too many of our once respected academic institutions in America have become hotspots, not just places that tolerate it, but hotspots of anti-Semitic rhetoric, violence, and hostility. The inaction of both university presidents and university administrators, along with inaction on the part of the Biden administration. These are things that have allowed a notable and unfortunate surge in anti-Semitism to create an atmosphere of fear and intimidation, depriving Jewish students, among others, of the opportunity to have a safe learning environment, an environment that's conducive to learning, as opposed to something quite the opposite of that. Now, in contrast, just over the few weeks he's been in office, President Trump has already issued an executive order to combat anti-Semitism on the campuses of America's colleges and universities. To enforce that mandate, he's established the Federal Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, which plans to visit 10 universities identified as having allowed anti-Semitic violence to foment and to remain unchecked. Now, Moments ago, we heard from one of my Democratic colleagues a suggestion that what has allowed this to happen is not, in fact, the fact that the U.S. government has literally funded Hamas, literally given money that has gone to Hamas, literally funded what Ms. Nomami was referring to, my term, not hers, the anti-Semitic industrial complex. Instead, it's a desire to withdraw some funding from the Office of Civil Rights within the U.S. Department of Education. Let me ask the question. At what point did the Office of Civil Rights inside the U.S. Department of Education do a darn thing about this? At what point did they stop funding from going to Hamas? At what point did they call for a halt to U.S. government funding of the anti-Semitism industrial complex? They didn't, they can't. He's talking about the wrong enemy. The enemy is before us. It's found in university colleges and administrations and in the prior administration for not doing anything at all about this. Ms. Gohab, with President Trump's administration prioritizing and escalating efforts to eradicate anti-Semitism on our college and university campuses in America, have you noticed any universities making reforms in response to that?
Not specifically, but I do understand from what I speak to students, which, by the way, I speak to students almost daily, students who are on campuses not only on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, in the South, and up North. And for the most part, they say that universities, for the first time, are seeming to take anti-Semitism seriously. They're no longer bending knees. What you saw at Columbia and at Barnard was a tragedy. This happened a week ago when students took over a building again. I mean, there's actually a video of the dean asking for permission from the protesters to use the restroom. We can't see that anymore. We can't see that at all. At the same time, I do want to say that it seems that the new administration, because they're putting teeth finally behind the Civil Rights Acts that we've been begging to be enforced, administrations are finally making a difference. Take, for example, NYU, which last year I filed my case against them in 2019, and then there was another case filed against them in 2023. They've changed their policies to have an anti-Zionism section that straight up says that you cannot use Zionism as a litmus test to let students in or out of spaces. You cannot ask students whether or not they're Zionists. You cannot have Zionist-free spaces. That's a huge step forward. I really think that administrations have started realizing that they were privileging activism over academics to the detriment of not only their Jewish population, but to any student who might think differently.
Often using contrived, supposed, but really false inadequacies in the law as a justification for it. Either an interpretation of the First Amendment that it really can't be reconciled with First Amendment jurisprudence, or in some cases, supposed inadequacies of the civil rights laws that don't exist. Now, the Anti-Semitism Task Force plans, at least initially, to visit the following 10 schools: Columbia, George Washington, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, New York, Northwestern, UCLA, Berkeley, Minnesota, and USC. Are there other schools that you would add to that list that ought to be at the top?
How much time do you have? I do think that every single Ivy League school is to blame. I think that there's some schools that can be studied. So, for example, there are studies like in Florida or schools in Georgia that immediately shut down the encampments. Even, for example, at Princeton, they put out a statement after the encampments at NYU and Columbia where they said any student who attempts to encamp will be suspended and possibly removed from the university. They had 2-3 students try to encamp and it was shut down immediately. I think if I'm thinking of other hotspots, was Berkeley on your list? Stanford?
It was not. So I'm sure there are lots of others that could be mentioned. Maybe we can cover those in a subsequent meeting. Ms. Nomami, what tools does the U.S. Department of Justice have at its disposal to go after those suspected of committing hate crimes against Jewish Americans?
Well, we have to prosecute. And to your earlier point, what has happened is that this anti-Israel industrial complex, as you very eloquently put it, has created franchises at these various universities that have taken money from these malign foreign influence actors. I would add Georgetown University to your list, where I taught journalism, George Mason University, UC Berkeley. They are creating this conveyor belt of radicals that are now going into our streets and on our campuses. The efforts that the Justice Department has to do is, one, investigate the malign foreign influence. Behind me, you will probably recognize the familiar color of the Code Pink activists. And what is unspoken oftentimes is the fact that a man by the name of Neville Roy Singham has helped to fund this Chinese propaganda against America, using Israel, for example, and Jews as now a Trojan horse to have this kind of hate. We have to stop those malign foreign actors. The signs that I've shown you include this lovely manifesto from the America's Communist generation, the American Communist Party. So these are malign foreign actors that are in the United States of America, and they want to overthrow our system as we know it. And to me, that is the most serious way that we can try to dismantle their network.
Marxism and anti-Semitism make a wicked combination. They tend to go together.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having this hearing. And it occurred to me as I'm just listening here that the Democrats have a real problem on their hands. There's a growing wing, Hamas wing of their party. So in a really tough spot to have these conversations. So I'm glad you had this. And it's also the reason why Josh Shapiro wasn't picked to be vice president, the nominee. I mean, this is just the hard calculus that Kamala Harris made, is that it would upset the pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party, and she's worried about losing Michigan. That's the truth. So we can like dance around all this all we want. So I'm glad we're having an open hearing for everyone to see, because after October 7th, a couple weeks later, I went on the Senate floor, and if you want to understand, you shouldn't actually be that surprised by what's happening on college campuses if you appreciate what's been taught now for at least a generation. And my friend on the other side wanted to understand the obsession with DEI. So do I. Because DEI is rooted in cultural Marxism. And cultural Marxism divides the room by immutable characteristics, principally by race. Every room is oppressor versus oppressed. So this idea of intersectionality is you group all the oppressed versus the oppressor. And guess what happens on that totem pole? On the totem pole of oppression, the Jews lose out because they're considered white or the oppressor, and it's very, very dangerous. So if you want to understand why this is happening on college campuses, is because they're viewing the room by oppressor versus oppressed. And it's terrible. It's a terrible road to go down. I do want to ask Ms. Nomani, I want to ask you a couple of questions that are related to this. So, you, in your book, Woke Army, looked into the unholy alliance between radical Muslims who preach jihad against Western freedoms and far left activists whose divisive ideology turns all the societal issues into a race war, end quote. Who's funding? Right. Who's funding this alliance? Who's funding Samadoun? Who's funding within our lifetime?
Yeah, this is exactly why this committee is a perfect place to answer that question for our country. The Justice Department must investigate those fundings, and exactly, in my book, the very first individuals from the cast of characters is Hatem Bazian from University of California at Berkeley, creating American Muslims for Palestine. Where is this base? The base is not far from where I live in Northern Virginia, at a place called 500 Grove Street, Senator Schmidt. And 500 Grove Street is the hub of these Islamist organizations in the United States. They are the legacy organizations of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is dedicated to the global caliphate and the destruction of the state of Israel. Qatar is funding these organizations. Saudi Arabia has been funding these organizations. Turkey is funding these organizations. Iran, China, Russian oligarchs, and others. This is malign foreign influence in our United States. And to the point that was made about the ideologues, this is Answer Coalition. They're using Free Palestine. Does anyone in this room know who Answer Coalition is? It's a socialist, Marxist, communist, self-declared organization.
Yes.
They are the ones that get the petitions for these protests that end up with the American flag being burnt. So we have to follow the money, Senator, absolutely.
I agree, and I think we're just getting started. And I think some of these NGOs that have been funded by USAID, there ought to be a bigger microscope on that too, because I think it's going to be terrifying what we find. And I also think you mentioned earlier, the cultural Marxism aspect that undergirds all of this relies on this constant churning, right? This constant churning, and it's also in corporate America too. Yes. These modern day struggle sessions that people have to go through, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and I think, thank God, President Trump won, because we're going to root this stuff out. It has no place. So if we really want to understand, I think what's happening on the college campuses is sort of the symptom of a much deeper problem, right? Which is we're in by the way, it's not just on college campuses anymore. If you want to understand what critical race theory is, and they'll say, well, there's no class on critical race theory. Well, there doesn't need to be a class on critical race theory if all of your trainings, all your professional development is rooted in critical race theory, which again is based in cultural Marxism. So all this stuff needs to be exposed. And so I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing here today.
Before I call on
Senator Schiff. Appreciate all of the witnesses being here today. This is obviously an incredibly important hearing, specifically held to address anti-Semitism. And, we will never address it, we will never fix it unless we have people on both sides making true representations. I was very surprised to have one witness blame our recent president for anti-Semitism when college campuses were overtaken and Jewish students had criminal acts perpetrated against them under a different administration. But I also thought it was interesting that we blamed the right for not admitting anti-Semitism is real when you have heard every one of us say, what are we going to do to address it? In Florida, and I appreciate the compliment for our universities, we did not see the incredibly dangerous, reckless, offensive, criminal behavior that we saw on college campuses around the nation, but that doesn't happen by accident. As soon as we saw this popping up, I was Attorney General. Leadership in Tallahassee was very clear. This is a law and order state. It will not happen. We communicated directly with our presidents, and not only that, I communicated directly with our chiefs of police, instructed them on the laws, the criminal laws that we were seeing, that people should be arrested for. And we specifically communicated with our state attorneys and said, if they are arrested, the last thing you should do is advocate that they get right back out and go right back to the university. As we saw in other states, this is proactive ways to stop this behavior before it destroys any semblance of sanity and peace and structure and free speech among a university. And so I'm really interested in some of the statements that maybe we give additional funding to stop this behavior. I think that's incredibly insane. In fact, I heard Senator Lee talk about, are we using all of the tools at DOJ to stop this? I think maybe we should examine, since federal funding flows to universities, maybe we should examine when universities are accused of allowing violations of the Civil Rights Act, and maybe when there are court opinions that actually make findings to suggest that has actually happened, maybe we should start clawing back federal funding that's already been given to them. That's a thought. And maybe, just maybe, the thing that happened last week where the university president asked permission in the middle of a protest of the protesters if he could go to the bathroom, maybe that wouldn't be happening if he thought maybe his federal funding might be clawed back. I was just wondering what you thought about that, Ms. Cohab.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think that something has to be held over the university's heads, because unless something happens and something changes and there's actual consequences, why would you change your actions? Look, I don't think the overwhelming majority of administrators are inherently anti-Semitic. I think they're lazy. And I think that they know that fighting anti-Semitism takes work, and it's not something that's easy. And yes, you're going to make some people angry, especially the kinds of students that you've been educating to be angry about everything. If you're admitting the kind of student who takes over buildings, don't be surprised when the kind of students take over buildings led by their very professors. That's the thing. We keep saying that there's an issue in higher education, but we have our head in the sand as to how to fix it. I think that consequences are absolutely necessary. Filing my complaint was enough to get NYU to the table for a settlement, but that wasn't even close to changing what happened. After October 7th, you still saw encampments at NYU, and they still had another case against them. I think that the law changes very slowly, and that the only way to hold people accountable is to make sure that there are consequences on the other side.
And Ms. Lewin, I'll ask you same question. Do you believe if we had additional tools provided by the government that allowed for a clawback of federal funds if universities were found to have allowed or even facilitated civil rights violation, do you think that would help in combating anti-Semitism on campuses? And you can answer briefly.
Absolutely, Senator Moody. I think that what we need most is to hold the universities accountable. The law is a very powerful motivator. And what we've seen is that just the threat of withholding the funds or clawing back the funds has already motivated universities to act. And I would suggest to you, quite frankly, that university administrators, when we've negotiated settlements with them, some of them are actually very relieved to be able to point to the law and to be able to say, we now have to do this because the law requires us to do it. And it gives them the backbone, which they otherwise seem to lack, to actually stand up and push back against the Jew hatred that's happening on their campus. So it's absolutely necessary to hold their feet to the fire and to impose these rules and show that violating them and violating Title VI has consequences.
Solomon, can you just give us some sense of what you think endangers dialogue among students? You've got a lot of experience at Tufts. Are there things that we can do that allow for robust debate but mutual respect?
Thank you so much for your question, Senator Welch. I think that, as you said before, universities must differentiate between protective speech and threats of violence. But I think what's even more important is that dialogue can be had, best be had, on the basis of education. If we are not aware of what is happening, we cannot have constructive dialogue about what is happening. And what I find issue with is when we are actively seeing people advocate for the cutting of federal funding to OCR, which is free and is often the only way for Jewish students to access avenues of advocacy. We are seeing that being threatened. I don't understand how we are able to encourage higher education institutes to be able to have these dialogues if there are so many political leaders advocating for the foundation of them to be cut off.
That was very helpful. I'm just going to give you a chance. What about OCR? I mean, that does seem like a pretty serious question. Yeah, Ms. Kojab, thank you very much.
And you can answer very briefly.
Very briefly. I don't advocate for the defunding of OCR, but at the same time, it wasn't defunded with nothing in place. They're replacing it with directed investigations. When I filed my case against NYU, OCR did open a complaint, and yet 3, 4, 5 years later, we see another lawsuit against NYU for the same exact thing, anti-Semitism. How do you get sued twice within 5 years for the same thing? Because whatever you did not work. So I'm not advocating for the defunding of OCR, but I am saying that at the same time, it has not been effective. Not a single school has lost their funding under Title VI, and it has not been enforced.
Thank you, Ms. Kohab. Thank you, Senator Welch. Senator Blackburn. I think Senator Welch would be upset with me as chair if I let everyone go past. Senator Welch, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you all for being here, for your time, for the preparation for the hearing, and for speaking out that and appreciate that. You know, this nation has stayed strong and free because we have allowed free speech in the public square. And to see what has taken place on some of these campuses. I think a mom I talked to who had a child at one of these elite universities said it best. They had spent money getting through high school, getting the best grades, being academically competitive, and feeling that they had opened her mind to want to experience the world and learn and appreciate others with diverse opinions and views and cultures. And they sent her to school, And every time she came home, they noticed it seemed to be her worldview was narrowing. Ms. Lewin, I want you to just briefly touch on what universities should be doing, could be doing, where they have gotten so far off track on this that no longer can a student feel safe asking the question or delivering a counterpoint. So I'll give it to you, and you can use that time to tell the story you wanted to tell with Ms. Britt.
Thank you very much. So universities, the first thing is they have to set the rules, and then they have to stick to them. They have to show that if you violate the rules, you will be held accountable. That's the most important thing that the universities have to do. But then they also need to be able to call out when there is a group on campus that is riling up the campus to turn against part of their community. And the story I was going to tell was about dialogue only works when you have willing participants. So Ms. Kochab talked about how in 2019 at NYU, there was a BDS, a boycott, divestment, sanction resolution that was adopted by the student government and endorsed by 53 student groups. But what was a little unusual at that time was that it called not only to boycott Israeli products and companies doing business with Israel, but to also boycott all of the Jewish organizations on campus, the pro-Israel groups, they called them. And you had then 53 student orgs that were saying, we're not going to engage with these Jewish students, we're not going to co-sponsor events with them or do projects with them. And so the university, to its credit, said, this is not a good thing to have so many of our students boycotting a group of our students. So they actually hired a professional facilitator to come in to try and facilitate a dialogue among these students. And I think Ms. Kochab was at that meeting. And so you had all these students who showed up, and the facilitator explained, we're not here, this is not a debate. We're not here to try and convince somebody I'm right, you're wrong. We're just going to go around the room and respectfully listen to one another. And what was supposed to be a 1.5-hour dialogue turned into a 2.5-hour discussion about whether the anti-Zionists would even talk to the Zionists. They said, we showed up here because we didn't want to risk losing our student government funding, but you can't force us to talk to one another. And I'm told that there was one Palestinian student in that room, and that student said, I don't understand it. The Jewish students seem to want to hear my story, but my allies won't let me tell it. And after 2.5 hours, the facilitator gave up. She said, I can't force you to talk. And she sent them home, and the university announced, we're not divesting from Israel, which is very nice, but it didn't do a thing to address this interpersonal tension between the students on the campus. Universities have to recognize that that's what's happening on the campus, the ostracizing, the marginalizing, the shunning of Jews, and they have to start addressing that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Please start.
Thank you. Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Adela Kochav, and I'm a legal fellow at the National Jewish Advocacy Center. My family is originally from Syria and Lebanon, and then they moved to Mexico City, where I was born, before we made our way to the United States. I grew up in a small Syrian Jewish community in Deal, New Jersey, where Zionism was always an integral part of my Jewish identity, like the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community in the United States. I started college in 2015 at what I thought was my dream school, NYU, and my first 2 years were great. But my junior year, everything shifted to Israel and Palestine. From boycotts in student government to boycotts against Israeli academics to 53 student groups pledging to boycott not only Israel, but the group that I was president of, and any group that would dare to partner with us. I, along with the Jewish community, felt entirely isolated. I met with 8 administrators across 5 departments who told me I was perceiving imagined threats. At one of our events, an anti-Zionist student set an Israeli flag on fire, while another grabbed the microphone from a Jewish girl chanting Free Palestine. Protesters tore down our flags, shredding them and hanging them from trees and lampposts. NYPD made arrests for property theft and damage, reckless endangerment, and assault. All of this occurred in the presence of NYU staff, security, and administrators, but the school didn't even make a statement. That same week, I was mobbed by a group of anti-Israel students yelling slurs in my face with their phones in my face. And at one point, the president of student government, herself overtly anti-Zionist, felt the need to step in before things got too violent. She broke through her own friend group, pushed through the crowd, and urged me to run. I left student government and stepped down from all of my leadership positions. My professors told me to stop attending classes in the Middle Eastern Studies departments, and they arranged for me to take my final final exams in a separate room away from my peers. Instead of taking action, NYU gave SJP an award for their outstanding contributions to NYU life. I tried to meet with the school, but again, my calls were dodged. At that point, I made the difficult decision to file a complaint against NYU for failing to protect the Jewish community. And remember, all of this was years before October 7th, 2023. In December of 2019, my case caught the attention of President Trump. He invited me to speak with him at a conference, and 3 days later, he signed the executive order on combating anti-Semitism. After that, I thought that things would get better. I made the decision to go to law school inspired by my experiences, but I chose to go to Yeshiva University, away from the hostility that I faced at NYU. I worked at the Queens DA and the Brooklyn DA, and I was ready to start my career as a prosecutor. Unfortunately, then came the events of October 7th, with Hamas's brutal attack in Israel and the aftermath that we saw here in America. Campuses across the country exploded with anti-Semitism, and I started getting calls from students asking me if they should hide their Magen Davids and take off their kippot. I was shocked and dumbfounded. I thought back to my time at NYU, and instead of becoming an ADA, I made the decision to work for the National Jewish Advocacy Center to defend Jewish civil rights. And senators, I'm here to testify that there's been no shortage of work. Yes, we focus on college campuses because that's where this kind of hatred is most apparent, but it's not necessarily where it's most acute. For example, studies show that campus-based anti-Semitism serves as a predictor for anti-Semitic incidents in surrounding counties. What I saw at NYU almost 6 years ago did not stay on campus. It has since spilled into workplaces, boardrooms, and city streets. At NJAC, we see Title VI cases on campuses, of course, but also in K-12 schools. We see Title VII in employment discrimination, Title II in public accommodations. We fight major corporations who are integrating BDS into their ESG policies. And we have dozens of cases for anti-Semitic incidents on airlines. At NJAC, we've also, after October 7th, have filed 5 major federal anti-terror cases against those providing material support to Hamas. We even used FaceBack Act provisions about obstructing houses of worship in order to protect synagogues from anti-Israel protests. The last administration had little appetite to enforce federal civil rights law that was already in place. So we had to take new ways, to pioneer ways to protect our community. I'm thrilled to see that the new administration is finally taking the issue seriously, but I'm also incredibly disheartened to see that some people still politicize this. First, at anti-Semitism hearings, we'll often hear from voices that don't represent the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community. Second, it seems that before this hearing, National Students for Justice in Palestine, which is one of the defendants in our anti-terror cases, sent out an email about this hearing looking for stories of the chilling effect that Trump's administration and their executive orders that he signed, especially after my case, might have on those tormenting the Jewish community. Now, we should give the committee the benefit of the doubt. SJP has never been known for their integrity. But even if the email's not true, it means that SJP saw an opening because of how political this has become. They're trying to attach themselves to the Democratic Party in order to co-opt their efforts to have a meaningful, real conversation about anti-Semitism. And I implore the members of this committee not to let that happen. I urge the minority to see us as people, your own constituents who actually need protection. We are the targets of hate crimes and discrimination. We want to work with you. Help us instead of looking for counterfactual counter-narratives. Next, I know some like SJP might frame steps to fight anti-Semitism as a threat against freedom of speech. Read the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act or the executive order, and they have nothing to do with speech. Anyone can say anything, no matter how abhorrent, about Jews or the Jewish state, but they cannot use that hate to justify unlawful discrimination. In terms of concrete proposals, we must adopt the IRA definition, which is supported by virtually every major Jewish organization, as well as the Bush, Obama, and Biden administrations across all federal discrimination law. Without a clear standard, justice is arbitrary, and anti-Semitism thrives in loopholes. Congress has the power and the obligation to close them. That, at the very least, should be bipartisan. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Rashan.
Thank you so much, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the committee. My name is Kevin Racklin, and I am the Washington Director of the Nexus Project, a group committed to countering the dangerous spike in anti-Semitism in ways that bring communities together and that preserve academic freedom and the right to free expression.
Now, Ms. Lewin.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and esteemed members of the committee, I'm honored to appear before you today. My name is Aliza Lewin, and I'm president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. I also have a law practice together with my father, Nathan Lewin, where I worked full-time before coming to the Brandeis Center. As an attorney, I've devoted much of my professional career to pursuing legal initiatives on behalf of the Jewish people. I led the legal team that represented the Israeli manufacturer and distributor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in his lawsuit against the ice cream company, which prevented an unlawful boycott of Israel. And I argued the case Zivotofsky versus Kerry before the U.S. Supreme Court, which influenced U.S. policy on Jerusalem's recognition. And together with my father, we brought the first case in the U.S. under the Anti-Terrorism Act, which helped establish a legal precedent enabling American victims of terror to sue domestic-based groups that provide material support for terror. As president of the Brandeis Center, I have spoken for the past 7 years when I've been in this position, almost every day, with students, parents, employees, medical professionals, patients, and other individuals who have encountered anti-Semitism. And let me share with you a bit of what I am hearing from them. First, Jewish students on campus are being subjected to a sustained, coordinated campaign that has convinced many of their classmates, professors, and even some administrators that it's okay and even commendable to ostracize Jewish students who refuse to renounce their connection to Israel. Two, universities have not only failed to protect their Jewish students from this harassment, but over the past year they have frequently catered to the very people who are doing the discrimination by refusing to hold them accountable for violating university policies and the law. Three, often the ones engaging in the discrimination claim that they're not discriminating against Jews, they're only discriminating against quote-unquote Zionists. But Zionism, the recognition that the Jews are a people with a deep ancestral connection to the land of Israel, and that as a people, Jews have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland, is, for most Jews, an integral component of their Jewishness. It's true that not all Jews are Zionists, just as not all Jews are Sabbath observers. But that does not negate the fact that for Jews who observe the Sabbath and for Jews who celebrate the Jewish people's ancestral heritage, those are key components of what it means to them to be Jewish. If someone were to exclude all Sabbath-observant Jews from their club, that would be obvious Jew hatred. Excluding Jews from a club or a space on campus for being Zionists is no different. It's akin to demanding that a Catholic disavow the Vatican or Muslims distance themselves from Mecca in order to be accepted. It's discriminatory, biased, and immoral. Four, over and over again, students and faculty and outside agitators break laws and violate campus rules in order to single out Israel and demonize the Jewish people. Make no mistake, what we're seeing on campus is not a good faith political debate. Students are not dialoguing, they're not even debating Middle Eastern policy in an effort to make constructive change. No, in fact, when Jewish students seek to engage and actually discuss the issues, they're frequently shut down and told, we don't speak to Zionists, or we won't speak with the colonizing oppressors. What's taking place on campus is not a good faith political debate. It is the vilification of Jews. Some have referred to it as the placard strategy. The messaging boils down to this simple equation of the Star of David equals the Zionists equals some evil concept. You can have your choice: apartheid, ethnic cleansing, colonialism, genocide, right? Those concepts are not being offered for a discussion about whether or not we meet the legal definition of apartheid or ethnic cleansing or genocide. No, they are being offered just to hammer into people's head the equation that needs to equate the Jew with evil. After October 7th, we began to see new placards on the campuses that said, let's keep our campus clean, with the Star of David in the trash can. So now the move has begun to push the Jews out of acceptable society. Number five, this Jew hatred is now spreading beyond the campuses. We're seeing it spread to workplaces, the healthcare industry, the publishing industry, and more. And six, the IRA definition, the most universally accepted definition there is desperately needed now to help educate administrators and society on how to tell the difference between a good faith political debate and the vilification of Jews. We should be engaging in the former and avoiding the latter. The IHRA definition states explicitly that, quote, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be considered anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. It is anti-Semitic to demonize, delegitimize, or apply a double standard to Jews and the Jewish collective, the Jewish nation state. And we need to begin using the IRA definition to understand the difference between the two. Seven, it's become clear to me that without congressional oversight, schools and workplaces are not going to fix this problem on their own. The law is a powerful motivating tool, and we need to begin using it to give administrators the backbone to hold accountable those who are engaging in this Jew hatred. I thank you again for including me in this hearing, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lewin. Now, Ms. Sullivan. Now, Mrs. Noamek.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chairman Grassley and Ranking Member Durbin. I sit before you today as a witness to what I have seen on the streets of our world. I was born in India. My parents gave me the name of Asra Nomani. Asra means the mystical journey that the Prophet Muhammad made from Mecca to Jerusalem, landing at the rock that now is called the Dome of the Rock. Why I'm here today is because I have a deep and profound care for every sentiment expressed today about this war that we are seeing on the Jewish people. It is disturbing and frightening. It is my worst nightmare. 22 years ago, I stood on a street in Karachi, Pakistan, and I waved goodbye to a dear friend. His name was Daniel Pearl. He was a friend who helped me learn America as an immigrant. He went with me to the big hunt down at DuPont Circle, now abandoned. He let me throw my first party because I hadn't gone to my prom as a good Muslim girl. There were parrots above us, and they sang into that Karachi sun. And in the days that followed, my friends, we learned that Danny had been kidnapped. He had been kidnapped by Muslim militants. First, they said he was a spy for the CIA. And then the newspapers unfortunately reported that Danny is Jewish. The ransom note arrived, senators, and it said that he was not just a spy for America, but he was a spy for the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. What they did in those next days is they demonized Danny because he was a grandson of Israel. Weeks later, we received the murder video. And in the murder video, Danny declared those words that are lasting forever beyond his breath. My father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, I am Jewish. Many people will think that he was targeted because he was Jewish. But an FBI agent went and interviewed the kidnapper, and he said, I didn't target him just because he's Jewish. I targeted him because he is a son of Israel. And in those last words of Danny, he said, there is a street in a town called B'nai Brak with my ancestor's name, Haim Pearl Street. I am here to report to you that in the 22 years since then, I have been investigating the network that has perpetuated the hate that was targeted against Danny. We have called them agitators today, and we have called them protesters, but they have names. They are from organizations that are in a network that I have numbered now at 1,500. This is not a grassroots organization. They put out posters like this one with military warfare and, ironically, no pride in genocide, free Palestine. They target everyone. I have this poster from the Democratic National Committee Convention, and you will see familiar faces, yes, because they target the Democrats also. But if you don't believe me about this network, look at their signs. What does it say here? American Muslims for Palestine. What does, Chairman Grassley, you mentioned the Hamas is coming graffiti at Union Station. It was not just an agitator. It was a man who is the Richmond director of American Muslims for Palestine. Who is it that burnt the flag at Union Station? It was a man who is, look at the fine print, Party for Socialism and Liberation. The hate that killed Danny Pearl on the streets of Karachi is now in our streets. It's on our campuses. It's a frightening network of the far left and the Islamist groups. Nobody in this room can support their ideals. Their ideals are against individual liberties and free enterprise. They want to destroy the United States of America. They want to destroy Israel. And our young Jewish students on campuses, our younger Dannies, are in their crosshairs. We must recognize this existential threat. It is a vast network. We must investigate them. We must have them register with the Foreign Agent Registration Act when they are doing the work of these malign foreign actors that want to destroy America. And we must support Muslim reform movement leaders who want to stand up with our Jewish brothers and sisters. Two of them sit behind me today, Anila Ali and Surya Deen, and they are the solution. We are the solution. We do not have to be divided in our contest over suffering. We must end hate of all kinds so that Danny's legacy can survive into the modern day with freedom for all and transparency and accountability so that all our young Dannies can be safe in this world. Thank you so much.
My name is Mayrav Batsheva Solomon. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm a junior at Tufts University studying international relations. I'm a proud Jewish American and the daughter of two conservative rabbis. I'm grateful for the tradition I grew up in, the values and ethics it instilled in me, and for the Jewish community I have found at Tufts. I'm here to share how I and other Jewish students experienced the increase in anti-Semitic incidents. The vast majority of our classmates are not Hamas-aligned radicals. They're students whose perspectives may differ from ours, but must be welcome as long as they voice them respectfully. When my grandparents applied to college, anti-Semitic quotas kept them from getting a fair shake. We shouldn't let the hateful ideas of a small minority of students be a reason to dismantle the education they fought so hard for. And this administration has suspended thousands of OCR investigations and no longer allows students or their families to file complaints. And now the office's future is uncertain. By threatening to withhold federal funds from universities that do not scrap their DEI programs, this administration is threatening the future of Holocaust awareness and anti-Semitism education on campus. This administration seems determined to sacrifice resources that keep Jewish students like me safe at the altar of their culture war. This president is taking a cue from the Heritage Foundation's Project Esther, developed by a task force that includes Christian nationalists without any major Jewish organization's input. Project Esther blames the spread of anti-Semitism on us. It completely ignores any anti-Semitism on the right, where year after year, the vast majority of violent incidents occur. As the president's close advisors raise their arms in fascist salutes, bigots on social media glorify Nazis and denigrate Jews, and white nationalist groups stage xenophobic rallies, we must be honest about the most urgent threat to the Jewish community.
So the normalizing of Nazi symbols, ideas, and slogans, like the Nazi salute, is deeply shocking and upsetting. Seeing this salute, one of the most perversive signals of anti-Semitism on perhaps the most prestigious platform in the country, is beyond terrifying for American Jews and Jews all around the world. Who could have imagined a president hosting a known Holocaust denier like Nick Fuentes, or a rap star who promotes brazen anti-Semitism? Who could have imagined senior administration officials promoting the Great Replacement Theory rhetoric, the same ideology that drove mass shootings at Tree of Life, El Paso, and Poway? The demonizing of vital institutions in Esther is now starting to come out in the mouths of our cabinet secretaries, like Secretary Kennedy, who just this week called universities greenhouses for this deadly pestilence of so-called woke cancel culture. This does not make Jews feel safer. It divides our society and pits Jews against other vulnerable communities who also face xenophobia, hate, and discrimination.
I want to first thank our witnesses. I know anytime there is a hearing or an event or a discussion which involves so much passion and people that want to protect others, and I know that it is difficult to prepare, it is difficult to be here, it is difficult to participate without being overcome with emotion and many times, and I felt that also from our audience today. So thank you for being here. This hearing was a long time coming. We've We've watched, I think, a lot of us over the last few years, and we're hoping for this opportunity. I thank Chairman Grassley for, as soon as we got the 119th Congress up and going, this is one of his first hearings. He felt it was that important. I agree with him. So many of my colleagues agree with him. So we were waiting for this day with anticipation. I know many of us were frustrated. We only had 5 minutes, but we all tried to stick to that. And we were grateful that you helped us stick to that time limit. Thank you again for being here. I want to thank all of the staff who helped make this hearing possible too. They are the fuel behind the engine that makes this committee run. So we're very grateful to the staff that's with us. And with that, we are adjourned for the afternoon. Thank you so much.